Welcome back to another Tim Kaine reaction. It has been a hot minute since we reacted to anything from Tim Kaine, but we had some free time today, and I'm off tomorrow. So, let's jump in. Why are modern games so big?
Hi everyone, it's
Oh
me,
my god,
Tim.
Tim, it's so
I'm
loud.
frequently asked, why is it so big? And I'm like, excuse me? Let me back up. I'm frequently asked,
He is. Oh my god, he came in hot today.
why are modern
I love
games
his
so
shirt though.
much bigger than older games? This comes up a lot on the channel, and I've answered it many times down in the comments. So I decided to finally make a video about it and talk about it in excruciating detail so that I can just point to people at this video and go, this is why.
It's a good video to have. It really is. I see it all the time when I am scrolling through Twitter with game dev things. It's understandable that you look at a game, some like older game, like older Bethesda title, and it's like 10 gigabytes to download the whole game, right? And it's like, okay, well, this is an open world RPG, but now the open world RPGs that we see now are 150 gigabytes to download. And it's not that we can't really compare efficiency between the two completely because we need to have the files and determine if there are any inefficient uses of those files. But there's a very good reason for a lot of that, and it really comes down to like the art side of things. It's not like code takes up a lot of space. Mesh files compress well because it's all mathematical geometric data. It's textures. It's textures, it's videos, it's sound files, things that just do not compress to a small file size. Where YouTube videos are so big. I mean, the same pixels. I guess if we want to get down to it, it's pixels.
If you're here for the short answer, why are modern games so big? I've got it for you. Art. Tap out now. We're done. That's pretty much the whole answer.
All right, that's it. That's the video. Thanks for watching that one, guys.
If you want some nuance to it, if you want some detail in art, and also that other things have gotten bigger, just not as big as art, then that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the video. So let's dive into it. Let's start with art, which is the biggest contributor to why the file sizes on a game that you buy, either physically or digitally, is so big. Let's start with resolution.
Yep.
The resolution for older games used to be tiny. They were like, 160 by 120 back in the EGA and CGA era.
Good old
By the time we
games.
got to VGA, it was 320 by 200 or sometimes 320 by 240.
Ooh,
crazy.
HD.
And a lot of people were like, that's good enough.
It's good.
Then we got 640, 480, which was considered super VGA. And for a long time, people were like, isn't that big enough? But monitors got bigger. People started playing on consoles attached to very huge TVs. So
It's like the moment you see one game with better resolution, now all the games with the old standard resolution look bad. Every single big like leap in visual quality throughout history, we've been like, wow, it looks so lifelike. There's no way we can get better than this, right? And then there is a way we can get better than that. And now we go back and look at those games and it's graphically not very impressive. At a certain point, I remember when Uncharted 2 came out and people were like, there's no way you can make a game that looks better than Uncharted 2. This is amazing. The lighting quality, the characters, the animation. And now look at our game.
High def. Then we went 2K. Then we went 4K. Each one of those roughly doubled the size of the screen. They didn't double the size of both dimensions. For example, 1920 by 1080, 24-bit, that's about 6 meg of data. Because remember, you have to have 3 bytes to do the...
So here's the interesting thing, though. And there's a reason why the 16 times the detail meme from Fallout 76 is not entirely a meme. When you are scaling resolution, you double, right? 2K to 4K is double the resolution. But 2K to 4K textures is 4 times the resolution because it's the law of square. It's squares scaling. It's not exactly double. It's actually, you go from 1K to 4K. It's 16 times the details where that meme comes from. So that's why. But that's 16 times the data that you're trying to compress using the same algorithms because you don't want to compress too far. It overtaxes the CPU and the disk, and we already have a lot of things that are taxing the CPU and disk, like gameplay or texture streaming, for instance. And so there is an optimal level of compression that minimizes disk space, but also minimizes the load on the CPU and the disk speed too. And that's really what we're trying to reach to. So it's a very tough balance to find.
24-bit. 2K is 2560 by 1440, which is 12 meg. And then 4K is often considered to be 3840 by 2160, which is 24 megs of pixel data. That's a lot of pixel data. And you may be thinking, well, what does that size have to do with anything? Well, let me start with textures. Every object you see in a 3D game is textured. Those textures have to get higher resolution to still look good on higher resolution screens. So as our screens got bigger, our textures got bigger. And
well, some of it too is based on like whether or not we're looking at like a hero mesh, right? If you're looking at something way out in the distance, we don't need a high texture for that if it's never brought forward. But a lot of games are bringing more information, more clutter, more objects closer to the screen. Or even if in a game like, Starfield had some criticism for like the complexity of a sandwich. But in Bethesda games, you can inspect every model up close. So every model does need high mesh density and good texture detail, and it needs to be consistent because anything you can pick up, you can inspect. And to keep that consistency with PBR materials, it's not just like one texture per object. You're often looking at 4 to 6 textures per object, in some cases more, in some cases fewer, but it depends on what we're talking about. And that's also not exactly true because some materials, some shaders, use multiple textures, right? For like different parameters to, maybe it's like calculating some additional like dirt and decals and such. And so you might have one material or one shader that is referencing even up to like 24 different textures in the files. Now, some of these are, like black and white, and so you minimize the amount of data in there, but it does all add up. It all adds up.
remember, they doubled in size every time that we went up a stage. So now we're at 4K, which is 24 meg of data, which means you need much bigger textures to look good. Similarly, models to look good at that resolution usually have more polygons in them. Mm-hmm. And that means that when you are making models, you have to have a denser mesh, which is bigger to store. And then all of those polygons in that mesh, or usually it's triangles, those get rendered to your screen with those higher resolution textures, which also have to be stored. But
well, one thing about the meshes, which is true, right? Because of course, something that is 100,000 vertices is going to be, heavier in terms of data than one that's 100. But it does depend, and generally speaking, when you are talking about like size on disk, which is different than size uncompressed. So when you are running that uncompression from your CPU is issuing the order to pull it from your disk and then render it on the GPU. Like a draw call in this case is what it's called. That's when the decompression happens. And so the size on disk for meshes is generally pretty small, even for something that is like a million triangles. But the uncompressed size can be pretty large. So meshes compress really well because it's like geometric data. So the compressors are like really happy with this. You can try this at home too. So like download some free really high quality mesh, right? One that's like 40 megabytes over a million triangles or something, and just right click on it and make like an RAR zip file, and then try to do something the same thing to like an image that's 40 megabytes, and you'll see that one compresses really well and another one barely compresses at all. And that's really what it comes down to.
Wait, it's even more complicated than that, because a lot of optimization techniques require storing multiple versions of both textures and models to use at different distances.
LODs.
It's a level of detail thing. So when you look at something far away, maybe they can use a model that has less polygons in it, and they can use lower resolution textures. And then when you get closer, they switch to the other ones. That way they don't have to downsample the textures when they're far away, or the models, which takes time, which reduces performance, which goes into frame rate, which I'm about to talk about in just a second. So just so you know, so that means you may be storing a 4K and a 2K and an HD texture size and model mesh density so that you can do level of detail and distance drawing efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, so like currently when you have like a mesh, you do bake it with those different LODs. So it's one mesh file that contains all those LODs, but it is additional data, right? And with the textures, that's really what it comes down to is just that it's like, okay, 4K is fine, that's really heavy. And as you go down, it's significantly less on the disk, but it does add up, and you're adding, I don't know, there's probably some way to mathematically determine what percentage additional is stored because you have the different texture sizes. What a lot of games have done is allow you to like download an HD texture pack, so like the 4K texture pack, and this is like another 20 gigabyte download or something. But you can just see there that of the game's default download size, just to get from its default download size of let's say like 40 gigabytes to 4K textures, they're adding in another 20 gigabytes. So that kind of gives you a really good indication of where in a lot of games that the heaviest part of that game is coming from. And it is art, like Tim says, it's all art.
But that gets into frame rate. It used to be that if you hit 30 frames a second in a game, you were considered good enough.
Yep.
Then it was 60 frames per second. Now it's 120, and 240 is looming on the horizon because people are like, well, in competitive esports, you need 240 frames per second so you can get that millisecond difference between the two competitors and their inputs.
Did you know that when Crysis came out, the best GPU at the time could not handle the game at a stable 30 FPS on max settings? I mean, that's really what we're trying to work up against, and it's not even just that the resolution of everything has increased, but also the rendering complexities. Especially with like lighting and shadows and global illumination. All of those things have also increased in quality too, and so it's like we're just constantly doing this catch up where sometimes the technology advances too fast and the GPUs haven't advanced enough. Sometimes the GPUs undergo a big advancement and the technology is lagging, and it's kind of just this tug of war that is constantly being played. And right now we're in kind of a location where technology is really good, GPUs haven't caught up to it yet, and right now with GPU and RAM prices, I don't know if they ever will. So we're hoping that optimizations can bring down the cost of those really expensive technologies like ray tracing.
Yes. But keep in mind that the animations of the models you're going to do are dependent on the frame rate. A higher frame rate means more complex, denser set of animations, so things look good when they move at that high frame rate, and you don't have to interpolate between frames. That's more data being stored too. Guess what? All this combines when we're talking about video, because there's so much more video associated with modern games than in older games. Older games often didn't have any video, or if they did, they had what was called the opening cinematic,
the opening cutscene,
and then that's all you got. The rest of it was.
Do you guys remember like old school dungeon crawlers and RPGs with the opening cinematics, and it just, God, it looked so. I don't know. It was so cool back in the day when you were like loading up something like Ultima for the first time, or like a Might and Magic game, and you saw the opening cinematic. But now if you go back to those, they look pretty silly. They're still pretty cool though. I do love them.
It's all game. Modern games have tons of cutscenes, multiple maybe opening cinematics, maybe one when before you get to the main menu, it's showing video for what would have been a splash screen for the game's logo. It's now a video, like lasers shooting around and the logo comes spinning out. So there's so much more video in modern games, and those videos are at higher resolution and higher frame rate, and you guessed it, those take a lot more storage space to put on your disc or digital download.
To be fair, there are some file types that can be used in games that are cheaper, but they do come with some loss in quality. So, I mean, it doesn't really benefit you to cook down a video. So what a lot of games will do is just not compress the video, because it's just a waste, and it would have to be uncompressed anyway by the CPU, which the video is already in a container, which has to be read, and it's just like you're doubling the decompression for pretty much no gain. So you will see, if you look around in like game files, that videos are usually packaged separately. And I think that's how Unreal does it, is they package all the videos separately by default.
By the way, I haven't even touched upon lighting. As lighting got more complex in video games, you not only had to store lights on maps, but
Yep.
texture, in addition to textures, you had to store
Shadow maps
normal
can be
maps and diffusion maps and all kinds of things to make the lighting look better. Just to make skin look good, you have to do something called subsurface
Scattering.
highlighting. I don't even know what it is. I'm not a graphics programmer. I
Yeah,
just
it's
remember
crazy.
looking at something and going, what are all those extra maps you're storing? And it was to make things look good under different lighting conditions, and to make certain things like skin look less plasticky and more like real skin. So, okay, that's like the basic art. That is like a piece of art in the game is way bigger now, way bigger. But wait, games are longer now. Back then, if you put out a 5 or 10 hour game, that was okay. Now people complain that it has to be at least 20, but 40 has become standard. People want a 40-hour game, and yeah, I do know there are people who want less lengthy games, and they talk about games respecting their time. But one of the first questions I'm ever asked is, "How long is your game?" People,
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's like for me, I agree. I want shorter games, but I wouldn't say that it's the norm. I think it's growing in popularity that people just want a fairly priced, reasonable single player experience that doesn't force them to grind out for hundreds of hours like a lot of the older games might have done. Um, it's just isn't as popular as it used to be. But with the longer games does require more content, and along with that, I think that scenes have just gotten way more complex too because we can push the boundaries of how many triangles we can render. So now we can clutter, but with the desire to clutter has come, well, we need to texture the clutter. And all of those probably need their own textures too, right? Because, well, this glass bottle in the back is going to look different than the books, and each of the book bindings needs to be a different texture too, although you can probably just store it in one thing. Was there a leak put out that a major publisher wanted their games to be longer to cut down on resells? I wouldn't be surprised, and there are known instances. I can tell you from personal experience, I know of instances where people have specifically designed games to be longer or to have longer tutorials so that they had fewer refunds, for instance. But yeah, when you talk to a publisher, I can tell you, yes, playtime matters to them. They like to use it as a metric for marketing. And to be honest, it does work sometimes. I don't know how popular it is nowadays, but I can tell you when I worked with the publisher, yeah, that was a big conversation point.
questions I'm ever asked is, "How long is your game?" People say they don't care, and then one of the first questions I got asked is, "Oh, your new RPG? How many hours is it? How many hours is the main storyline?" Sometimes people want over 100 hours in that. And guess what? If you have games of that length, what comes hand in hand with that is people want more variety in all kinds of things. They want more maps, which then have to be stored.
Yep.
They want more environment variety, which means
More dialogue.
they're not going to be happy with every map just being grassland. They want some forests, and they want deserts and snow and mountains and coastlines and all that, which means all these new textures and props that have to be put in to those maps.
Well, think of even like things that require textures that you might not think about, or like visual effects. Visual effects need textures too. And visual effects are also just expensive to run generally, but if you want good looking visual effects like good looking fire or good looking smoke, those are textures that you need. Begs the question, what makes a good marketer selling the product that is made or influenced the product to make it easier to sell? I don't know the specifics. You should know one of the first things that I recommend for any game is to know its audience. Know your audience, because once you know your audience, you'll know what they're looking for and what makes them want to purchase your game. And there is an audience for people who want games like RPG games that are shorter. They don't want to be told, yes, this game has 500 hours of content. They would be more willing to buy your game if you said, my game is $20 and has 40 hours of content. There's a market for that. If you don't know who your market is, you don't know if that one single line is going to be a selling point or a pain point. Most people don't like their audience. I mean, that happens too sometimes, yeah. That happens too, unfortunately.
Which is a lot more art, which and the art and those art pieces are already individually bigger. But then they want more items. They want more weapons you can find and more armor you can wear
Icons
and
and
just other things that you can
sound
find and
effects,
use. And they want it to look really good. They
animation
want it to look good
types.
in their user interface. They want it to look good on the ground. They want
Yep.
it to look good when they wield it. And often those are 3 different models. And those, you guessed it, are stored at a much bigger size on modern games.
Well, yeah, like think of like a game like Elden Ring or something where people are like, "Hey, From Software, can you add this new weapon type?" I don't know what a weapon type is that Elden Ring. Let's pretend for a second that Elden Ring doesn't have spear type weapon. Well, if we know anything about Elden Ring has a base type of a weapon, and it has their own animation set, and they share that animation set between different weapons in that category. Well, if they add a new category like pole arms in this case, they need to add the text, they need to add the animation move set, they need to add unique weapons, they need to add bosses that drop those weapons. They need to add in the models for it. They need to have all of the I think I said sound effects, but they need to have like localization for all of that. They need to balance it. They need to test it. It's just one little desire that feels like it shouldn't be that big of a thing to add does add in a whole lot of time, art, money, file size, and all those things can change because maybe let's say Elden Ring is on the Nintendo Switch, for instance. I know it isn't, but let's say it is. Well, Nintendo Switch stores its physical copies on cartridges, and if your game exceeds a certain size, it needs to buy a different type of cartridge from Nintendo to put the game on, and therefore it increases the cost to develop the game. It all matters. Even the smallest things matter. It all just scales up. One little decision can compound on, and that's why early on in pre-production you'll have very important questions that need to have very specific answers, and understandings that those answers can trickle down into massive amounts of scope, right? When you choose, should our game be single player or multiplayer, that impacts every single aspect of the game and the way it's developed and the way it's marketed, the audience of who it's for, the rating system, the networking. Is it a PvP game? It's a competitive, so it does networking and security matter a lot to this game because you don't want people to cheat. Man, it could just go on and on, but we're kind of getting off topic. Sorry, Tim.
I haven't even talked about special effects. It used to be you might have for a spell system, landing, you might have here's a boom effect, here's some effect is going off on them, and then here's a little, projectile effect. Yeah. Now people want a different effect for every spell, yeah. And they want those effects to be high resolution and have really good sound, which brings me into all the other things besides art that have gotten bigger. Sound is a big one. There's more music, more voiceover, more sound effects in modern games, and all of those are now stored at a much higher quality. We used to do not even 8-bit monophonic wave files that we compressed to beyond their breaking point so they'd fit on a floppy. Now people are putting in tracks of music and whole libraries of 100,000 voiceover lines and tons of special effects for all those different sound effects for all the different special effects you put in, and those are stored at high quality, often high bit levels and stereo, sometimes 5.1, so you have a center channel stored as well. Yeah. That takes up more space.
I mean, we were just playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and it was just astounding how many lines of dialogue, and it's all voiced, there was. I would be scared to know how much of that game is just dialogue sound lines. I really would, because it was impressive, but wow, was it a lot. Playing through God of War and wondering who it was for, you hate the kid. It's Atreus in God of War in the new series.
Code takes up more space, and you may wonder why. Well, bigger games with more features have more code, but also if you're incorporating libraries or using engines, often if you use one feature out of a library or one part of an engine, it brings in the whole chunk that in court uses that part, even though you're only using that one part. It doesn't.
I will say though that like code compiles down pretty well and compresses really well too, so it does increase, but the bare bones like code base of engines is relatively small compared to the rest of what you're making. Right? Even Unreal Engine, which is bloated by the way, I think boils down to like 150, 200 megabytes if you turn everything off and just make a raw build.
And get rid of
It's
the
a
rest.
lot, but it's not
Now,
that
these
bad.
aren't as big as art, but people always will go, well, you didn't talk about sound and code. There's that.
Okay,
One
that's why
other
he's doing
thing
it.
that factors in here is compression. We used to compress a lot because we had to fit on
Yep.
floppies or on a CD. We often decompress during install, and that's why you often saw different installation options where you could say keep it small on disk and then you have a performance hit when you play the game, or you could decompress to your hard drive and then you'd have a faster loading and all that. Well, modern games, people expect no or very fast load times.
Yep.
There's a modern trend to complain whenever there's a loading screen. And also, if you want to keep your frame rate high, you probably can't be decompressing everything that you're loading into memory when you're
You're
demand
gonna
loading
bottleneck
things. Like people
CPU.
go around a corner and there's a new texture on a wall, there's a tree, there's a monster, and you've got to load that really quickly. If you have to load and decompress while you're doing it, that may slow you down and drop your frame rate. So maybe you don't do the compression. Guess what? That leads to everything being bigger on disk.
Well, that can lead. So you know how you'll see like shader compilation, right? And um, the reason why you do a lot of that, you do a lot of the pre-caching of shaders initially is to reduce the amount of stuttering from that necessary compilation that needs to happen at runtime. Just because shaders have gotten so complex that it does cause that noticeable impact on performance when you need to compile that PBR shader during runtime, where you enter a new area and it has to do hundreds at once. You either have to have like a long loading screen there or try to do it during runtime, which will cause those hitches. So yeah, it's gotten much worse, and nowadays we compress down to hell as best we can, but it's not perfect. And then the best thing to do is just to do a pre-compilation of the shaders to reduce hitches during runtime. But unfortunately, you're not going to catch every shader or every instance during that pre-cache, and there might still be some instances where your CPU needs to do a quick compilation during runtime. But it's a balance, right? And that takes up space, is storing that compiled shader. And you might be thinking, well, why can't they just ship you the compiled shaders ahead of time so that you don't have that issue? Well, they do that on console, but because it requires the engine to know exactly what hardware combination you're using, and even in some cases software versions, we can't send all that data to you. We can package the most popular ones, but that would still be an additional maybe 50 gigabytes that we need to package with every single copy of the game, just so that most systems, let's say like 80% of players, would not have those hitches. But that's really not, it's not tenable. It's not really going to be feasible. There is something apparently being worked on by Microsoft where they want to have a like universal shader library as like a middleman. I don't really know how it works, but I think it's with like some new DirectX update. Somebody told me, and it would remove the need to do that for every individual. I don't know. I'm not gonna talk on my ass. I don't know about that one, but I heard something about that. Somebody told me.
Now, yes, sound and code have gotten bigger, but the largest, by far, contributor to why modern games are bigger is art.
Yeah.
And this is the video I'm going to point to the next time someone says, why are games so big?
What can I say? It is what it is. It's just, you want better looking games. You're gonna have to accept that the art's gonna take up a big piece of that. There's already a universal shader implementation though. I don't know about that. All I know is right now for most, I believe both Vulkan and DirectX 12 require pre-compilation based on the way they are. DirectX 11 did not allow that. You had to compile shaders at runtime. And then there are nuances with each engine that are very specific. So, no, good video from Tim. I hope that more people see that and can understand why games are so big. It's just, I think that a lot of people that are going to watch something like this will be other developers who already know this answer, but exactly 16 times the detail. 4 times the size. Plenty of game engines let you use the same shaders on Linux and Windows. It wouldn't be possible though. Like, just because of different drivers and GPUs and hardware configurations, there probably wouldn't be every single use case. Like, that's just not how shader compilation. If the hardware is the same, you can ship shaders with the game, and that's what's done on consoles to make them not have those compilation stutters. But for PC, currently, it's pretty much not possible or not feasible to ship shaders with games in pretty much every case. But yeah, if you guys like that, here's the video. If you're watching on YouTube, hope you like that one. We'll have another one coming up right now, so keep an eye out.